For this video, I wanted to cover the child tax credit for 2021. So these are 2021 Form 1040 tax returns that are being filed on or before April 18th, 2022. So there's a lot of confusion around who's eligible to file for a child tax credit, what is a qualifying child, what are some of the age restrictions, and so on. So I'm going to go through the list here, cover some examples, try to help clarify any questions you might have regarding whether or not you're eligible for this, and if so, what amounts do you get. So broadly, or at least to start, the amounts, right? So starting in 2021, they increased the amounts to $3,000 for children between the ages of 6 and 17. And then if you have a child that's under the age of 5, then you get $3,600 per child. Now, so some of the requirements that have to be met here for both the taxpayer and the child, right? There's really two separate pieces here. So the first one at the top there, the taxpayer can't be claimed as a dependent on another person's return. So this might seem obvious, but often it kind of gets messed up. So what we mean there is that if you're a parent, if you just had a new child, and you are still a dependent of somebody else, right? So let's say your parents, right? Let's say you had a child when you were really young, and you and your child are still living with your parents. If you're claimed as a dependent by your parents, then you can't claim this tax credit. What normally happens in that scenario is the grandparents are claiming everybody. And so if that's the case, then you might still have to file a Form 1040 for yourself because you're working, but you are claimed as a dependent on another person's return. And so for those reasons, you can't claim the child tax credit for your newborn child. Okay, so that's the first one. The second one, the child's got to have a valid tax ID number. So this is either Social Security number or ITIN. And of course, the child already can't be claimed on another person's return. So the two pieces there, valid tax ID number, very, very important. If you try to file and claim the credit without putting down the tax ID number, the return's going to get rejected. I see it all the time. If you have a newborn and the SSN hasn't been assigned yet, then you just have to wait, right? So you have to file an extension for your tax return. So extend it from April 18th out to October, gives you another 6 months for the Social Security Administration to get that thing processed, and then you can input the ID number and file. If you try to put in applied for or all nines or leave it blank or do something tricky like that, it's absolutely going to get rejected. You have got to wait until that number is assigned before you file. Okay. Third point there, the child has to be claimed as a dependent on your return, right? So this is obvious, and it seems like we're kind of duplicating some things here, but I'll talk about, with respect to the age test, how there's a subtle distinction there. So when we think of a dependent, it's generally, your child, the age is either 18 or under, or it could be the child could be age 18 to 24 if they're a full-time student, right? So if you have a child in college and you're still providing for more than one half of their support, you can claim them as a dependent as long as they're under 24. But if they're over if they're 18 or over, then you're not going to get the child tax credit, right? And so that's why we have to really kind of parse the unique details here. There is a difference between being just a dependent child and then being a dependent child that is going to be eligible for this child tax credit, okay? And so I'll talk about that a little more when we get down to the age test. So the first one is the income limitations. Obviously, this is always a big one. The full credit you can get if your filing status is single and you have under $75,000 of modified adjusted gross income, or $112,500 for HOH, or $150 for married filing joint, right? If your income is over those levels, then the credit starts to phase out. And then if it reaches a point where you have what the IRS would consider to be too much money, the credit is eliminated altogether. So That's the first big test, as well as the income limitations. Now the age test, this is where the dependency thing gets a little tricky. In order to get the child tax credit, the child's got to be under 18 at the end of the year. So if you have a kid that turns 18 on December 30th, 2021, you can't get this credit, right? They're 18 at the end of the year, so they're not eligible for the child tax credit. Now, in contrast, as I noted there, dependent children can be up to 24 years old if they're still students. And so if you have a student and you provide more than half of their support, they can still be your dependent. You can get things like the earned income tax credit, and there's a variety of other tax credits too for dependents. But with respect to this specific child tax credit, you're not going to be able to claim the child unless they're under 18 at the end of the year. Okay, now relationship test, the second one down there, the child has to be your own child, and this also includes adopted children, whether you're adopting from the U.S. or outside the U.S. If the adoption has been legally completed, then they're your dependent, they're a qualifying child. Also includes stepchildren, foster children, and it can include your siblings, right? So if you have a brother or a sister and they're 17 or under and they meet all these other tests, right? You provide all the support, you can claim them as a dependent for the child tax credit. So brothers, sisters, and then it applies across the board to descendants, right? So any descendants of these people will also qualify. So your nieces, your nephews, again, if you meet all the requirements, they're under the certain ages, you provide all the support, the residency piece, everything. And then lastly, their grandchildren, right? So I got a lot of questions from parents that are grandparents and they're taking care of the grandchild. Can they claim the grandchild as a dependent and get this child tax credit? The answer is yes, right? If you're taking care of your grandchild for whatever reason, the parent isn't, so your kid is not taking care of the child, you can claim the grandchild and get this child tax credit, assuming all the other elements are met. Okay, and then cousins, yeah. So you can't claim your cousin as a dependent, right? So, technically, I guess they just don't fall within the descendant realm, right? So it's really just, your kids, your brothers or sisters, and then everybody down is really what is going to be included. Okay, so the support tests there, the fourth bullet, the taxpayer must provide more than half of the support for the child. So this is the same standard in the general dependency standard. So obviously you've got to provide more than half of this is basically just a monetary test, right? If you're taking care of them, you're going to know, right, that you provide more than half of the support. Residence test, child must have lived with you for more than half of the year. There are exceptions. With most rules always have exceptions. One of the big ones here is for divorced or separated parents. So if you have a child, let's say, and you get divorced, if the child doesn't live with you more than half of the year, you can still get this, but generally the custodial parent is the one that's claiming them. However, there is a way to waive that exemption. So you can have the custodial parent complete a form. I believe it's an 8812. I'll put a link to that below. But basically, the custodial parent can waive the dependency claim and say, look, the child lives with me, maybe even on a full-time basis, but you provide more than half of the support. There's the relationship test, and so I'm going to give you the option to be able to claim them as a dependent, and then if you do that, then you can claim them for the child tax credit as well. Okay, and then the last one, the citizenship test. So the child has to be either a U.S. citizen, U.S. national, or a U.S. resident alien. Resident alien meaning that you're physically present in the U.S. Under a visa. And of course, there's, like everything else, there's exceptions for adopted children. Normally this will arise when you have a foreign adoption. So if you adopt a child from overseas, that might fall within one of these exceptions, and so you can claim them as a dependent and get the child tax credit. Okay, so I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave me a comment below, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next video. Thank you.